So she invited Branson to come along. And so Branson invited Leroy. So Leroy came along, and he had a relationship with a lady called Tina, and she invited a guy called Johnson. So Johnson invited the teacher, whose name is Leslie. And she came along, and they developed their relationship to the point that they got married. And Leslie then invited a lady called Arena, and we're waiting to see what's going to happen next.
Well, kia ora, and welcome to the Redemptive Family Podcast, where we are going to be exploring highly relational, sort of back to basic ways of being church that really make church growth inevitable. And one reason for that is, well, because we know from experience, as you'll be hearing from the Love Your Neighbour team later on, that it works, but also it's what Jesus has called us to do. Well, this is episode 2 in our series of Help My Church is Shrinking. Now, you may be listening in and you may have thought those very words, or you may have voiced them. Well, you're in the right place, because we want to give you a truckload of hope in the remaining weeks of these series of how your church is not necessarily declining and it's going to end. We're going to give you some hope for a brighter future, that you can take your church to another level that you may not even be experiencing yet. Well, my name is Steve Hooper. It's my privilege to be hosting this show with the Love Your Neighbour team. And back in the studio with me today is Howard Webb. Hi, Howard.
Kia ora, Steve.
Nice to see you again. Always good to work with
back.
you. And you've brought the whole Love Your Neighbour team today. So you have your better half, Lynette, is with us in the studio. Hi, Lynette.
Hi, Steve.
And right next to me is Bruce Edmonds.
Hi, Steve.
Yeah, hi, Bruce. What do we call them? The three amigos of the Love Your Neighbour team. So maybe for those of you that, those who are listening that don't know you, maybe just a fun fact, something that you do in your spare time or as a hobby. Maybe Howie, what do you like to do?
Well, I enjoy collecting and restoring vintage watches, Steve, so a bit different.
So do you wear a different one every day, or?
Pretty much.
Oh, fantastic.
Every few hours.
How many watches do you have? Have you keep count?
About 40 at the moment.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic. What about you, Lynette? What do you like to do in your spare time?
I enjoy hanging with friends and eating with friends. I also enjoy making music with my kids and in the community choir, pot around in the garden a bit, and I enjoy photography.
Very cool. I've met your kids. Yes, very musical family. And Bruce?
I could say I listened to Howard talking about his watches, but,
which I'm sure you do a lot.
But in my spare time, I play squash.
Fantastic.
Yeah, only master squash, because at the age I am, that's all I can manage.
Yeah.
So we actually get to hit the ball and then talk about all the injuries we have.
Just don't run into the wall. But yeah, great game. Fantastic. Oh, thanks, guys. So the title of this episode is Bringing Discipleship Making into Sunday Church. Now, that sounds intriguing to me. So maybe, Howard, would you like to frame the conversation for us?
I think what came out of the conversation with Paul last week is that we've kind of inherited a way of doing church that's pretty much about singing and listening to a sermon. But what's really needed is that we need to get back to the heart of what the New Testament talks about, which is we need to be making disciples. That, after all, is the Great Commission that Jesus gave us. And making disciples is very human. It's very relational. It's not some hard thing, some hard program which only, super spiritual people can do and should care about. Making the disciples is really a very basic thing. It's not just something we branch into when everything else is good. It should be the core focus of what we do. And when our focus is on disciple making, it's about life. It's about growth. And that's the very opposite of a declining church, right? And so life and growth is really what we want to put back in the heart of church. And when you are alive and growing, you're so much more attractive as well. People are intrigued and go, wow, I want to be around you guys. It's fun to be around here. I can kind of see the point of coming here. So that's really an important thing. And so we can't be on mission without making disciples, because the two really go hand in hand. And so the idea of being an active church that's about doing something is really an important idea. And that really brings us to today's episode, Steve, because if we are meant to be a disciple-making family on a mission, then it seems logical to me that disciple making and mission should also just naturally be a part of what we do on Sunday, because here we are, and this is what we're about. To exclude it from Sunday for some reason is really weird to me. And so we're going to talk about how we really need to be bringing all of the stuff into our Sunday service. It seems logical that it should be there, but does it happen in church? And our experience is not so much.
Lynette, I know that this model of church excites you. So what excites you the most about it?
Well, it looks a fair bit like ordinary church for the most part. You come there, you know you've come to church because we still have a message and we sing songs and have time of worship, but we reserve a lot of time for conversation.
And sorry, just to interrupt my poor wife there. We're talking about the church that we planted, right? Church
Yes, church at
126.
Yeah,
okay.
And so we've actually planted this church, and it's based on the model that we're talking about here. Sorry, I didn't mean to
fine,
interrupt.
good clarity there.
Good.
So every Sunday we begin with a meal. We have a potluck dinner every Sunday, and I think now we've probably done more than 300, so it really is part of our standard operation and the way we roll. And we have a lot of time for conversation in the evening. The evening is structured around easy conversation. People sit around tables. There's a question to talk about at your table. There's some games sometimes to interact over and have some fun. There's a discussion question following the message. And we really believe that time to talk is important so we can get to know each other. We can laugh together, pray for each other, learn what's happening in each other's lives. And that gives us some continuity and accountability through the week. And so we really feel like every week we need to structure well for conversation because it's that important to us.
So it sounds to me this is a little bit not like normal church, as most people would think. It's more relational and conversational. Bruce, can you comment on that?
Yeah, relationship is really key to all of this. When we think of our church as family, that's all based on relationship. So you can't take this idea of relationship away from family. When you think of how the Bible calls us and describes us, we did a little bit of research, and every book of the Bible refers to God's people as family. Yeah. And so we're wanting to major on that fact. So family. In our communities, we have good families and dysfunctional families, but good families are relational. We need to really embrace that. We need to hold on to it. Jesus himself, when he was working in his mission field, was highly relational in the way that he developed his disciples. He even got to the point of saying, well, who is my family? And then calling that his disciples. Yeah. So this idea of relationship, the connection that makes is so important to everything we do.
Great. Any further comments, Howard or Lynette?
Our neighbours are really hungry for relationship too. We live in a world that's really marked by loneliness. And what everyone really wants and needs deep down, whether they've consciously thought about it or not, is they want to belong to a family. So Peter Drucker said everyone's looking for 3 C's, the 3 universal things: community, contribution, and commitment. And a community is a place to belong. Contribution, what I do matters here. Yeah. And then commitment, I'm in service to an idea bigger than myself. That's really what Peter Drucker was saying. And we try and work that out, Church at 126.
You must have plenty of stories. I'm sure you do, and I've heard some of them. And actually, I heard you share a story recently at our church, who is going through the Redemptive Family Church series right now. The story about Albert.
Yes.
Fantastic, powerful story. Maybe can you share that one with?
I'd love to. Yes,
I'd love more people to hear that.
All right, and we have Albert's permission to share the story.
Yes, I knew that because you've shared it already.
Yes. So Albert came to us 4.5 years ago. And he was a man who was extremely lonely. He was uncertain of his future. He didn't have a place to belong. He didn't really have a friend in this country. He had a court case hanging over his head. He'd had this court case hanging out there for ages. During the COVID time, it kept being postponed, and he wasn't sure if at the outcome of that he would be deported back to his homeland or if he would be allowed to stay in New Zealand or do some jail time. So he came to us as a man very anxious and without support. But as he was able to share his story in our time at church, he realized that this whole group of people loved him and cared for him and were able to support him. And they did through prayer in the months leading up to his court case. And then on the day when we turned out in force, to stand with him and say, we attest to this man as a man of character. And I think the judge was really impressed by that. So long story short, he was dismissed without a conviction. And we were able to really rejoice with him at that wonderful verdict and the liberty it gave him to feel secure staying in New Zealand. So that was the church being community for him. But Albert's also been able to feel like he could contribute. He's become a valued member of our church family. He even helped at our daughter's wedding. If I had a picture, I could show you him standing there in his apron as one of the 12 waiters, doing his thing for us. He's participated in working bees as we've cleaned up people's gardens. He's been faithful and generous with his time. And every Sunday he's on the camera helping us capture what's happening for our Zoom listeners and watchers. He's there doing his faithful bit. He's also felt a growing sense of commitment. When he came to Christ, he told us about it and explained that he'd done this a couple of weeks previously. We didn't know, but he insisted on being baptized and making that commitment evident. And then we've seen him just be faithful in his own walk with God as he reads the scriptures and prays faithfully. We heard from him how when his mum was dying in China, he was able to share with her over, I think it was WeChat, his own faith and lead her to faith in Christ. And one of his siblings who was present at her bedside videoed that and sent it back to us. And we were really just so touched by Albert's growing in faith, his deep commitment to God, but then his commitment to us as a family to help us help him on the journey and to celebrate those successes with him. And Albert describes our church family as his real family, his heartwarming family. And that's heartwarming for us because he's become one of us and he feels right at home in our midst.
Yeah, oh, fantastic. Oh, thanks so much for sharing. And I know you guys have so many stories, but Bruce, maybe other than the feel-good factor, I mean, it's nice to turn up to church and feel good about what's happening, but there must be other practical benefits of being a relational, missional church, surely.
Well, there are, yeah.
I thought you might think so. Yeah.
Glad you asked me that question.
Yeah, tell us so.
Yeah, so I think the idea of team in this setting is so important.
Yeah.
Lynette, just talking about Albert, talked about how he was part of the team working in the working bee. That's just one example. So we experienced that on Sunday. We have lots of people getting involved in teams right from the very beginning. We have a shared meal, and so we have a kitchen team. At the very beginning of our service, we have communion, and there's a team who provide communion and lead us in that. There's the team that lead us in singing. We have a preaching co-op, which is team. Every single part of what we do has teams of people getting involved. And when you have team, you can try to be effective time managers, or you can focus on relationship. And that's what we do, because we want people to be able to contribute what they have in those teams. And of course, it's not just on Sunday. We have midweek groups, and so they form teams as they grow together. They get to know and trust each other, and they grow in their discipleship making process. And we also have teams that get together for things like the working bee that Nick mentioned. We go out on our plastic collection on the beach. Cool. And trying to make our local community a better place and help our neighbours that way. So there are all of these examples where we form team and then grow together and form deeper and deeper relationships. It really works.
Oh, that's very cool.
Talking about it being practically beneficial to know each other, it really is true at 126. We know our people's strengths and giftings, and we have, the preachers, teachers, evangelists, administrators, what you normally might think of as the spiritual gifts, but we also have so many people who are able to create a wonderful, hospitable and helpful place for others. So we have a couple of ladies who make an art space to bring together Christian and not yet Christian artists to practice their craft together. We have those who are able to lend a listening ear to the people in distress or struggling with substance abuse. We have people who can offer a family meal, people who are just great at being a friend and sitting with someone, people who can help with dog training or babysitting or computer repairs. The fact is, although we're a small family, we know this about each other. We know each other quite well. And although we don't have time to do all of these things on a Sunday, obviously, we find out about each other's needs and who has stuff to offer so that during the week people can meet up and be community for each other. And this isn't just for the people inside of the church family, but it's for the people I'm in relationship with. So I know someone who's struggling with computer problems. I'll bring them in to the context and say, hey, I know this lovely guy called Howard who could help you fix your PC. Or if I need a babysitter, there's someone to call on. So we're showing love in our actions. And then when we come alongside people, we share our journey of faith with them. We're pooling our wisdom, our resources, and our energy to demonstrate what a loving family looks like. So that's on the very practical side of helps. But also we're training people and hoping to train people in good conversation skills. Do little nuggets now and then, or what does it mean to be an attentive listener? What does that look like? How do I take the conversation deeper? How do I ask good questions to get to the heart of what this person's issue really is? And then how do I pray with them? How do I share about my journey of faith in a way that's not overwhelming but appropriate to where they're at? So we really believe that's part of the very practical training that we all need to be learning and developing in. And no one is disqualified because of a disability if they happen to have an ailment. A lot of us do. Or they're in a wheelchair, whatever. Everyone has something they can contribute. No one is excluded. And we're better as an interdependent family than lone rangers. Together we can do it.
Sounds like a big loving family right there.
And there's a benefit of being this highly relational, missional family that's easy to overlook. And there's that sort of prickly word, accountability, right? And some people love it and some people don't find it such a friendly word. But someone who wants to grow as a disciple of Jesus really values accountability, really values people being able to lovingly speak into their life. But it feels weird and inappropriate when the other person doesn't really know you. And so that's when it doesn't happen. And so the connection time on Sunday combined with, all the other connection times through the week just creates a sense of intimacy within the family that grows trust, that grows openness, that allows accountability to kind of happen, because you're not going to be accountable to someone you don't trust and don't know, and you can trust is going to be a safe person for you.
Oh, this is good stuff. So I know a little bit about your church from having heard you in these episodes, but also just talking in conversation with you. So it sounds like people rock up to your church each Sunday. They're going to have a memorable, fulfilling time where they feel like they're part of a family. There's a community. There's belonging there, which is all fantastic stuff, isn't it? But what about outsiders? How do people hear about you and how do you involve them in your service?
Well, I guess there's two key aspects to this. One is invitation and the other is hospitality. When you think of the term outsiders, we think of them as guests, and we have hosts who make invitations. And without invitation, who's going to actually know that we exist and even turn up? I mean, it's possible, but it's not really likely. So invitation is how people find out about us and how they come, because a friend, someone they know says, I'm going, why don't you come with me? And that's just so effective when people do that. We celebrate invitation because it's such a key part of our mission. In our church service on Sunday, we're always asking the question, who's invited someone? Cool. And we recognize that when you make an invitation, that's in your control. Whether someone says yes or no or maybe, that's in their control. But we celebrate the fact that people actually ask. So you've made the invitation. Your friend has said, yeah, I'll come along. And then they rock up to us, this new place that they've never been to before on a Sunday evening. And then it's, well, how did they get included? And this is where hospitality is so important. It starts right from when they come in the door. We all wear name tags. It's not a case of we ask the newcomer to wear a name tag so that they stand out and are different. Everybody wears it. And so we ask, can we give you a name tag as well? Which obviously makes it easier for people to talk to them because they can read their name. And when you know someone's name, that just makes life a lot easier. If they've come with their friend, then we encourage them to sit at the table with their friend, and they get introduced to the table, just like we're sitting around now, and they get introduced to the others at the table. And there's room for discussion because you're actually sharing life. And so that guest is becoming included into the life of our church family. That's such an important part. Even when we are having our message, our sermon, we finish with discussion around the points that were made. And so this newcomer, this guest, is being involved at that level as well, as much as they want to, because obviously we want this to be a safe place. So that's the process that we work in. There's invitation and there's hospitality. I can give you an example.
Yeah.
So right at the beginning of when we started Church at 126, there was a lady who was part of our church family called Sonia. And she's an older lady, but she was working. And her boss's father was someone that she had a relationship with. So she invited Branson to come along. And Branson is an amazing guy. And I'd just love to tell you his story, but there's just not time.
We'll do a separate podcast on it.
We'd have to. But he was someone who really cared about people. And he'd gotten to know this guy called Leroy, who had just come over from China. His English was very poor, and Branson was helping him develop his English skills. And so Branson invited Leroy. So Leroy came along, and he had a relationship with a lady called Tina, who's another older lady, another amazing person that you could have a whole podcast about, and she's so on fire. But she heard about Church at 126 through Leroy and was invited, and she came along, became involved in our church family, and she invited a guy called Johnson, who is another Chinese gentleman.
For a very long time, right?
Well, yeah, I won't take the whole podcast for it. So Johnson, who'd come over from Hong Kong and was establishing himself in New Zealand, and he was going to an ESOL class and invited the teacher, whose name is Leslie. And she came along, and they developed their relationship to the point that they got married.
Wow.
So that's a whole story in itself. And Leslie then invited a lady called Irina, who's a Russian lady who was also doing ESOL. And we're waiting to see what's going to happen next. But this is an example of invitation, then hospitality. Someone comes and joins and becomes a host alongside us, becomes part of our church family. And then they're making invitations, and the cycle goes on and on and on.
So just to make it clear, because I'm not sure how clear we've been, but there's an awful lot of time for talking on a Sunday night. So we go for about 2 hours from 6 to 8. And in all that time, there's about 20 minutes when you really should be quiet and listen to what the preacher's saying. Yeah. The rest of the time is talk time. It's conversation time. So that's a lot of time devoted to that. It's not all just say whatever you want, right? It is it's facilitated, it's shaped, it's conversation about what matters. It's about important conversations. But because of that, we give people a chance to talk, to minister, to actually interact with the people who are around them and be on mission with them. That's what we mean by being on mission with people. It's having that time to get to know them, to care about them, to input into their lives, and to receive input yourself. Because, all of us are a certain shape and size, and we need each other like a jigsaw puzzle for the picture to be beautiful. So we could structure church around passive consumers, right? We could structure church around the people who've come for the meal, who've come to sing some songs, who've come to hear a message. And if we just structure church around those people, we're going to end up being growth is going to really be slowed down. But when we structure our time around people who want to contribute to the body life of the church, those who want to grow as disciples, may be a bit uncomfortable for the people who aren't there yet, who are kind of a little bit on the outside looking in. But we're showing them the heart of things. We're showing them what it's really all about. We're giving them a chance to see Christian life in action, to see what church does. And as a result, everybody grows. When we try to make it a really safe, bland space for like the lowest common denominator, it's so safe. There's no cut through. It doesn't really show anybody what it is that's going on the inside. So, I think being on mission on Sunday is just really, really important.
Yeah. So I'm sure there's people listening who are thinking that that story of your family, though all those names that you mentioned, Bruce, and then the way that you do things at your church, there's probably people thinking, that is fantastic. I wish I had a story like that in my church. But I'm sure there's many people who are listening thinking, gosh, do we have to do mission on Sunday? I mean, why can't we just leave that our church as it is and do mission some other time? I mean, how would you respond to that? Maybe, Bruce?
Well, yeah, this is a bee in my bonnet. I get wound up by this. So when people say the thing, how do we do mission, or when should we do mission? I think that's a real issue in itself.
Yeah.
When are you not doing mission, right? So we need to think of ourselves as people on mission. And sitting around the table here, we're on mission. Sitting around the table and church on Sunday, we're on mission, because this is who we are as followers of Jesus. This is what we're meant to be. Yeah. And so to take the idea that this minute I'm on mission and the next minute I'm not on mission, just to me seems really weird. Yeah. How can you do that? But people do. So when you think of doing mission on Sunday, we need to think, well, if we're on mission, the most important time of our week should be the most important part of our mission.
Well, yeah.
Right? Because otherwise, what are we doing?
That's the window into who you really are, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So you think of church family life. Sunday is like our flagship event. This is when we're all together. This is when we put the most of our time and effort into making something special. Yeah. So for me, being on mission in that time is the most important thing that we can do. If we demonstrate that this is missional, that the things that we care about are what we do on Sunday, then this is the message that we send to everybody else who gets involved with us. How we spend our time tells people what we think is most important. Yeah. So if we spend most of our time not being on mission, sad to say, that saying mission is not so important. I don't want to give that message across to people around me. I want people to see that mission is the most important thing, and this is how we spend our time. And then you think of church family and how we're brought together and we're gifted to build up the life of the church. Well, if we're not missional on Sunday, how do those people who are part of the church family contribute the gifts that they've been given? Where's their opportunity to be missional? So all of this has to come together, in my mind, to be missional on Sunday. It's not doing mission, but it's being missional.
I think we have some exemplars of that in our midst, and we've mentioned already Branson and Tina, but I can just remember some years back when Branson, frail as he was, and with his walker and his health declining, he had a strong walk with God that had seen him through decades of life. So when a chap called Craig came into our service, whose permission we also have to tell the story of, Craig needed someone just to listen to him, to pray with him, to get him back on the rails, to help him find what was really important in life. And Branson was the right person for him. 30 years older than him, but with the wisdom of God and the love and discernment as well, Branson was able to help Craig bring his life under God's control, give his heart to Christ, and he was baptized. It was just amazing to see someone so frail, who may not be a preacher or a teacher in any conventional church setting, have the microphone. He was ministering in a very real way to someone in desperate need. And then Tina, our fiery evangelist, who Bruce also mentioned, in her mid-80s now, in the kitchen washing dishes. And alongside her is a young man who really needed some direction in his life as well. And she could, speak it straight to him. She had nothing to lose. And washing the dishes is a good place to do it, because side by side, without that eye-to-eye, intimidating kind of uncomfortable conversational dynamic, she could really share from her heart and minister to him. And then another instance that comes to mind, a young lady walked in very distressed, depressed and grieving, and an older woman whose new grandmother was able to just reach out and speak words to her that got her back on track, helped her to see it wasn't quite the end of the world. But in that space, church wasn't just about sitting down and being quiet, but each of those people could speak what was on their heart and speak from their need, and somebody could respond with love and discernment. So when we see that kind of mission being modeled, newcomers can watch and learn and try it out themselves. And then we also have time for people to share about answers to prayer. So we see growth through the week as people are able, or through the weeks, Sunday by Sunday, as people are able to share about God's work in their life. And I think that's just so dynamic because it's not just talking theory, it's applied, it's God's wisdom, it's the scripture, it's the Holy Spirit in my life applied week by week in real situations.
What I love about this is it seems to me like, well, I know that you guys are modeling the stuff that you're talking about. So it's more than just content, it's more than just words. You're actually doing it. But you guys, you're familiar with, your church of around about 30. I'm guessing that you started pretty small, right? And it's growing, but at a church of around about 30 who are excited about their future. But what would you say to someone who's at a church that would maybe used to be 100 or more and they've dwindled down to roughly 30 and they're not so excited or they're not feeling good? What would you say to them?
Yeah, we're talking from our experience of Church at 126.
Yeah.
And as you said, we started as a church plant, so that's the very beginning. There was nothing
from
before.
Scratch. Yeah.
So from scratch.
Yeah.
And we've built through that number 30 and are still growing. So we haven't quite got the example that you're talking about, but the factor of being a number 30 is not a problem.
Yeah.
It's actually exciting because when you're on mission together, and when you're supporting each other and you're recognizing that you're working in God's mission field, it's an exciting process. And you need to know that you're enough. Whoever you are, you're actually enough for the situation that you've been placed in. And this is our experience. So we don't have superstars on our team. We've got a whole range of people with a whole range of experiences and ages. And together, we're able to do something that's really quite amazing because God is enabling that to happen. So we're a small church, but we're growing and it's exciting. And we can see a future ahead of us that's leading towards that number of 100. But when we get to 100, well, we're going to need to start thinking, how do we create this into two church families? Because it's not about growing to 400 or 1,000 or those magical numbers. It's always coming back to being on mission and in relationship. And once you get to too big a number, holding that relationship is very difficult. Yeah. So we would then be saying, let's get back to 30 and do it all again.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah. So 30 is not a problem. 30 is a great place to be.
Awesome.
I can chuck in my 2 cents worth.
Please do. More than 2 cents, I'm sure.
I'd say it's not about the programs you run. Don't be so concerned about choosing just the right thing. It's about the people that God has already given you, as Bruce said. And that's each other, filled with the Holy Spirit and God's love overflowing through your lives. Think simple, highly relational when you choose what to do. And that way you will build a strong community that's known for its love. And, Jesus said that love is irresistible.
I think what we're talking about is life without boxes. I think if you want to put church in a box and say church is a 1-hour program that happens on Sunday and that's just a little self-standing box that's not part of the rest of my life, you're going to be in trouble, really, because church needs to relate to all aspects of my life, and church, you can't afford to just put church in a box. What we all want is life without boxes, and we need to be living holistically and leading holistic lives where church is integrated with the rest of my week, and the people of church are integrated with the rest of my week and the rest of my life. They need to become real friends and not just church acquaintances, so that we can be a family on mission together.
Fantastic. Well, before we go, we've mentioned the Redemptive Family Church series. We mentioned it last week in the episode. We may have mentioned it today. But maybe before we go, Howard, if a church is looking for a way of maybe getting the whole church on the same page, of really having a refreshed vision of being a family on mission together, this has got to be a great resource, right? From your humble, unbiased opinion.
Yes, from my completely humble, unbiased opinion.
I can overwhelmingly endorse that as well. But maybe tell us a little bit more about, first of all, your book, Redemptive Family, and also the series.
Yeah. So this is the book, Redemptive Family. And really it kind of outlines a model of doing church that we think is very biblical. And we've tried to model church at 1-6 on this basis.
And it's working, right?
And it is working.
Yeah,
it's
more than just at your
great.
church. Yeah, a lot of churches.
Yeah, it's hard to go back.
Yeah.
Once you've experienced what we're experiencing, it's really hard to go back to doing church the old way. So it's really about 4 big ideas. It's about being a family in a place on a mission together. And so those 4 simple ideas are really the kind of framework that this whole book is really based around. This is the little devotional and workbook that people would use if a church goes through the Redemptive Family Church series. And so we're going to be, in one of the episodes up ahead, we're going to be talking about how this can just become a catalyst for helping your church become that, a family on a mission together.
Yep.
But in here is daily devotionals. There's a small group study. There's some surveys that you can fill out at the end of each week. And of course, the series also has some sermon outlines and stuff. And basically, it takes you on a journey of, helps you start speaking the same language. And we're hoping that at the end of this, you'll have a church-wide conversation. And that's really what the Love Your Neighbour crew does. We have a lot of experience, and we've had a lot of fun in facilitating those church-wide conversations for a number of churches around the place. And so why don't you jump on our website, redemptivefamily.org, just check out the resources on there and reach out to us. Drop us a line. We'd love to start a conversation with you.
Absolutely. No, thanks for sharing that. I mean, this is a pretty small team, as you can see. This is the whole Love Your Neighbour team. And I'm just amazed at, in a country like New Zealand, how many churches you've walked alongside on this journey with using this material, which is transformational. It's life-changing. So definitely check that out. That's all we have time for today. I'm feeling inspired. I hope you are too from having listening. And next week, we're going to jump deeper into the question of how we can make disciples of each other in our church family. So don't miss that one. We're going to be sharing some more great content. We're going to have these guys back in the studio in another couple of weeks. I've got a special guest next week. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure you jump on and join us. And don't miss out on the conversations that are coming up. And do check out redemptivefamily.org.
Redemptive Family is a podcast by Love Your Neighbour, recorded by Campfire Studios and produced by Toby Palmer. Our intro music is Jazz Brunch, and outro music is Carpe Diem, both by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Our ad music is Chiefs by Jahzzar, Jahzzar, and can be found at freemusicarchive.org. Special thanks to our host, Steve Hooper from Family Life. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to like and leave a review. We always love reading them. And lastly, for more episodes, resources, and hope, head to www.redemptivefamily.org. See you there.